Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Tactical Review. As you can see on the left side of your screen, I once again have Elias with me. He has managed to survive all of his ailments and travels and my technological difficulties. Welcome back, Elias. How are you doing this evening?
Doing pretty good. How about you?
I'm doing just peachy. My internet seems to be working. I've had a solid week. I managed to actually get a regular episode uploaded this week, and actually have had some fantastic discussion with Mike from Swamp Fox Optics. That's we might touch on that, but we've got Brownies and Riemann in the chat so far. I see we have 6 folks. Go ahead and sound off. Ladies and gentlemen, you guys are a critical part of a live chat. Otherwise, we would just kind of do this as a podcast and upload the video, which was actually where we were nearly to. Just uploading a pre-recorded and hanging out in the live chat and doing a premiere. I'm glad that we didn't have to do that. Vanessa's in the chat. Welcome. We don't have, well, we have a ton of topic tonight without having a ton of topic, if that makes sense. As you guys can see from the title, we're going to be talking about some executive orders that primarily presidential executive orders are where we're focusing. And this was kind of brought about here within the last couple of weeks. I'm sure you guys have seen the headlines that out on the western seaboard that some protesters had been snatched up by unmarked kind of undercover agents and detained. And so Elias and I were going to talk about that basically the week that it happened or began happening or made major news, and due to my unstable internet at the time, that live stream didn't happen. And then here within the last few days, and this seems trivial, it really does, but we started seeing through the news that President Trump is talking about banning the social media app TikTok by executive fiat. And so all of that coming together just made me want to talk about this. And I know it's a little bit off the beaten trail for Second Amendment, but realistically it's not, because it was not that long ago that President Trump very famously banned bump stocks by executive action. So we're going to just start kind of digging into this, and kind of this slippery slope that it could be, I think, is a good way to put it. What do you think, Elias?
Yeah, sounds good. We'll talk about which ones are legal and which ones aren't.
There we go. Stone Age Idaho in the chat, driving, so just listening. Yeah, you didn't even have to say that. We appreciate you joining, and be safe out there on the highways and byways. Brastard's in the chat, and I'm going to say right now, enjoying the fact that you're shooting 7.62. That's, actually, trying to curtail elections. Yeah, that's just more good stuff to talk about. I've got to say, I have a few Facebook friends, actually, and they're people that I get along with very well in the day-to-day. They're left-leaning, and President Trump has just given them plenty of ammunition here in recent weeks. So, yeah. But before we get into that, I want to say, or will remind everybody, I've seen a lot of memes recently talking about, if you're buying ammo at the current prices, you're part of the problem, making it take longer before things come back to a realm of normalcy. Do keep your eyes peeled. Last weekend, I was only able to get one box due to store limits, but I was able to get a box of 9mm Blazer for about 22 cents a round, fairly close to normal. So keep your eyes peeled. I'm noticing from people talking online, places like Academy Sports, places like your Big R's, your Rural Kings, that have ammo on shelf. They're going to be right now the places that tend to be close to normal, within 5 cents above per round, versus online where I was seeing steel case Wolf 9mm going for 32 cents a round, and that's just unacceptable. Poor conservative, I'm kicking myself because several months back I toyed with the idea of picking up a 4-hole turret press and starting to get components when they were still readily available. And I did the math, and it was coming out to something like 4 cents a round, only a 4 cents per round savings to reload versus buying factory new. And so I made the choice instead to buy a couple of cases of ammunition. And once again, I'm still trying to get into the prepper mindset. And what I should have done, because the writing was on the wall, is I should have bought the reloading stuff, the reloading components, and set it aside and purchased pre-made ammunition when it was still close to pre-panic prices. And then now, when everything's out of stock, I would be able to shift gears and start reloading. Lessons learned right there. Anyway, all that said, last weekend I made it over to my local Rural King and walked in, said hi to the guy at the counter, and he asked if there was anything specific I was looking for. I told him I was just nosing around for ammunition, and he's like, well, I hope it's not 9mm. I'm all out of that. He did have one stack of, it was either Gecko or Norma, 55 grain ball ammunition, just plain old range ammo. Tell you what, guys, before I tell you what the cost was, for just drop a guess for a box of 20, and I'll even give you guys a few dollar range. You could say, if you want to make us all laugh, you can say, oh, between $7 and $9 a box. It hasn't been that for a while. That's a spoiler. Elias, what do you think that they were selling plain old 55 grain Plinken ammo?
$40.
$40. Wow, $2 a round. I'm not shopping where you shop.
It's also late and I can't do math.
There you go. Poor conservative saying 17. We'll give a couple minutes. I know there's a little bit of a delay here, so I'll give some people some time to get some guesses in. Brastard reminding us that that also banned by Fiat were import of surplus arms, 7N6 and bump stocks. Yeah. Riemann saying $23. Let's see. Brastard shoots reloads, making lead bullets. Oh, I found, guys, it was like an 8-day order out. I did find a company making 60 and 70 grain 224, 225, whatever the casting diameter is. But they were making 60 and 70 grain dies for casting your own pills for 223. So if anybody's interested, I might be able to scare that back up. And I think they were fairly reasonably priced. Anyway, all right, I'm going to say, Riemann, you were pretty close to on the money. I think it was $22 a box. It was definitely north of $1 a round for regular old ball ammo.
See, and you criticize the $2 a round, but I could actually see it today being that much and people buying it.
Right. You know, actually, it's kind of funny because back in February we were ripping a certain online vendor that I'm not even going to give them the advertisement of saying their name out loud for selling steel case at 90 cents a round, and now we're, you know, if you can find steel case, I think that it's going for 60 to 70 cents a round. So
yeah, exactly, I could see it, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and I noticed the other day that see, 762 by 39 was just a few cents high, and I've seen it creep up a little higher yet. So fortunately, I accidentally ordered 2 cases a couple months ago instead of 1 case, and you know, now I feel like Master Oogway is speaking to me and saying there are no accidents. So
I'll be happy when the prices go back down.
Amen. But
it's hard to even go into the range right now because of how much it costs.
Yeah. On a guess, depending on the results of November, the earliest we'll see it go down is January. And yeah, and it may not go down for 4 years.
I was gonna say, I don't even want to think about it.
So anyway, one last thing before we get into the meat and potatoes tonight. I noticed I was clicking through my YouTube studio page. I was actually looking to see if there were new comments that I had missed on any videos. And I did see that we are just over 30 subscribers away from the next giveaway. So you guys are awesome, sharing the videos and whatnot, and kind of excited for this next round of giveaways, which puts us at very close to halfway to the point where I click on please and YouTube says, no, you violate community guidelines. We won't give you any money. But
well, at least you know it's coming.
Yeah, you know, I think there are still advantages algorithmically. That's kind of a hard word to say. I think there's still advantages to clicking the monetize button, but I don't know. It makes me feel better. It makes me feel better.
I hadn't looked at 223 recently. 60 cents
for brass or steel.
Yeah, for brass.
Where are you finding that? Sadly, that's a good price right now.
Oh, it's just off ammo seat.
Oh, okay.
I mean, Bass Pro. Okay, don't trust Bass Pro. They'll tell you they have it, but they don't actually have it.
You know, though, if you are in store at Bass Pro, I mean, their prices, well, that's a little astronomical, but I've seen people still buying their Herders 9mm for 35 cents. So, wait, no. Hold up. Well, it probably is 35 cents now. It was like 28, which is, I mean, that's crazy to think. It's like, oh, it's only 10 cents high per round. It's like, dude, that's $100 a case. So.
Hey, Brastard, Gecko Lax Ammunition's got Gecko for 42 cents. If you want to buy 1,000. Otherwise, you're looking at about 50 to 60 cents.
Actually, if it's just brass on AmmoSeek, you can search just for reloading components. So, yeah.
That's a good point. I'm actually thinking.
Right.
Look that up for him.
I wish LAX would have gotten back with me about an ammo sponsorship of any kind. I mean, they didn't even tell me to go copulate with myself in the corner. They just ghosted me. Alas.
762.39 just for reloading. Just for brass. Let's see. Yeah, about 30 cents ish.
Patsy, the problem with 762 by 39 is that most people just shoot imported steel case because it's half the price, and
because they're cheap.
That's exactly why I shoot steel case through everything.
I know.
But in fairness, you know, the big deal with steel case in a straighter wall, because of course 223.556 is still a tapered cartridge, but it's relatively straight from the case head to the neck, especially compared to 762 by 39. And that straighter wall, some chambers have a habit of it sticking in there, especially when it was lacquered instead of polymered. Where with the a lot of the Soviet calibers, actually, those Comblock calibers, they're a severe taper, and so they don't stick as readily, and so they've always been steel cased because it was cheap to manufacture. Because spoiler alert, communist countries tend to be kind of poor.
I was gonna say, I don't know why, but it just seems like it fits steel for an AK.
Yeah,
It
it
just
seems
fits.
weird seeing somebody loading brass into an AK.
And it's just that kind of weird thing. Just it fits.
That said, if you have one of those rarity hyper accurized AKs or anything in X39, it gives you the ability to really fine tune your load. If you're hand loading or whatever. Anyway, Brastard, I've actually got a lot of I've got a lot of brass. I tend to go brass goblin at the end of my range sessions, and I pick up a lot of stuff that I don't even own a firearm that would fire, because I have found out that one of my local gun stores will let me trade in spent brass for store credit. So something I'm going to start doing. All right, well,
Nice.
How about we get back onto the beaten path and start talking about some of these executive orders. Specifically, now if I was really on the ball, I would have had the dates that these were passed. But we have... Here we go. Just had to click the right thing. 714. I think that this falls under Executive Order 13934. No, 13933, signed June 26th and published on July 2nd. We had the Protecting American Monuments, Memorials, and Statues and Combating Recent Criminal Violence. That just rolls right off the tongue. And allegedly, this was passed to stop the rioting that was defacing so many American monuments. But here recently, we have seen this enacted to put federal law enforcement officers onto the scene in cities that are still heavily protested due to the Black Lives Matter movements and the death of George Floyd. So, and what we are seeing are reports in Portland and in, I believe, Seattle, where unmarked vehicles are rolling up. Guys are hopping out in battle rattle with generic patches, like morale patches that just say police, and snatching folks up and spiriting them away. Yeah, that's slightly problematic.
I mean, slightly putting it mildly.
Right. And there's so much to unpack in this. So, obviously, I've been on record, and so I'm going to go back on record, that torching buildings and especially committing acts of arson and excessively violent vandalism on occupied buildings is not protest, it is terrorism. So I think that's an important place to start before everybody just tunes out and says that I have gone turncoat. that said, yeah, there's no due process to any of this. And Elias, like I said, I know that you had suggested covering this a couple weeks ago. So I think that you've done a lot of homework and background on this.
Well, I mean, first I think you gotta consider the way that the country was structured in the first place. If we go back to the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers and the concerns that the framers had when first establishing the country, there was a huge concern about a standing army in the first place. Right. They didn't even want a standing army like what we have today, because the army has, throughout history, been used by tyrants to enforce their powers. So the idea was keep everything local, as low, leave it to the states, and however the states want to handle things, they can. Once we started having a standing army, then that's what brought along the Posse Comitatus Act, which said that you could not use the regular army against citizens within the country, unless Congress allowed it. Well, there's one law that's been carved out for the Posse Comitatus to. So what the Posse Comitatus Act says is that you can't do it unless Congress allows it by law, which there is a law, which is the Insurrection Act. So Congress passed the Insurrection Act, which does allow armed forces and the National Guard to be used against U.S. citizens in a federal law. And let me say this through a federalized. National Guard can be used by the governor at any time. Right. And that's all. That's the way it's intended. But once they're federalized, they are, for all intents and purposes, U.S. regular Army troops. So, Insurrection Act allows, and Trump threatened to use the Insurrection Act at the beginning of June. The Insurrection Act allows armed forces and National Guard to be used, but there's very strict criteria. It can only be done if it's been requested by the state legislature or the governor. If the legislature's not and can't be convened in time. For instance, Indiana, we don't have a full-time legislature. They come for only a few weeks a year. The governor can recall them all for a session, but it takes time. So let's say that something just went horribly wrong. The governor feels he can't handle it. That the National Guard by itself in Indiana can't handle it. He can't get the legislature back in time to address it quickly. He can ask the president to invoke the Insurrection Act. But if the legislature is in session, like say Michigan, which is a full-time legislature, then the legislature has to do it, not the governor. It's allowed to when there is an insurrection and it's impracticable to enforce the law. Let's say that they have just overrun all the police forces or the police. They just can't handle it by themselves. Or to address an insurrection, domestic violence, or unlawful combination of conspiracy, pretty much when the state is rising up against the U.S. Mm-hmm. Then they could use it. The thing is, we didn't see any of that in Portland. And the idea behind it is to protect. There is a small other area where if it's protecting a federal property. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, in Portland, the excuse was, well, they've been attacking federal courthouses. Fine, and you can send the troops there, or not the troops, but you can send those agents there, but they have to actually stay on the federal property. They can't be going through the city and deciding that they're going to start enforcing federal law all over the city.
Right.
When Lincoln tried to. When Lincoln tried to enact martial law in the United States, the Supreme Court slammed him down immediately and said that's not how it works. Right. The country is still running. The courts are still running. You don't get to declare martial law just because you don't like the way things are going. To me, this is very, very close to declaring martial law when the federal troops just decide they're going to go in and do anything. And you can call the DHS law enforcement all you want. The fact is they're federal troops. And actually what's even worse is a lot of these guys, turns out they were contractors. They're not even federal agents. Essentially it was Blackwater or whoever's taking over from Blackwater now.
Right.
Which that goes back to a whole different thing that we did before. Essentially what you have is there's a very narrow set of criteria. And looking at it, and obviously I'm not a lawyer, but to me it just doesn't jive up. That narrow set of criteria wasn't there.
Well, now, just to play devil's advocate, which is difficult for me because I the core of my being says this is wrong.
We have
but,
to, right? But we
right.
have to do that because we have to be able to see
Right.
both sides of the story.
So one of the scope there says to address an insurrection, domestic violence, unlawful combination or conspiracy in any state which results in the deprivation of constitutionally secured rights, where the state is unable, fails, or refuses to protect said rights. So, going off of that, let's look at the situation that has happened in Seattle, where we have law-abiding citizens who are in fear of their right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, which I will grant you is the Declaration of Independence, not the Constitution. I'll grant you that. But we have U.S. citizens who have been in fear that will be forcibly taken from them due to the violence of the protests/riots, and where the mayor has basically sided with the protesters/rioters, and where the governor has failed to send in state police and/or National Guard. Does that fall within the auspices of the Insurrection Act of 1807?
The problem is I don't think we know. And I think that when it's kind of like that situation where it's not so much that they're not enforcing the law or they can't enforce it, they're just choosing not to. I think at that point probably should have been something that would have been taken to the Supreme Court.
Right.
Get an emergency action from the Supreme Court, an emergency injunction, something like that, where they could have piped it, because we don't really have that. They're not really. People being scared for their life is not the same thing as being told that they don't have the right to assemble. Nobody was stopping others who didn't agree, for instance, with what Seattle was doing. Nothing was stopping them from on their own in their own areas assembling.
Right. Okay.
So I think that's one of those things where I don't think it really fits that criteria to me. As being an armchair lawyer, I don't really see that as being that, because they weren't depriving other people. Now, you can say we were scared for us, but at the same time, a counter argument would be is don't be in those areas then.
Fair enough.
Obviously, if you live there, it becomes a little bit more difficult, and I think there could have been a thing where the local U.S. attorney, in order to represent those people who live directly in those areas, could have taken it to court by saying, hey, you have to, the governor doesn't have a choice. He has to act. But short of that, I think there's an army for don't go in those areas. If you don't live in those areas, stay out of it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's...
Yeah, so there is, and there is that kind of thing of don't go looking for trouble. So in my opinion, it still doesn't justify federal troops going in.
Right, and
if we want to call them actual military, or we want to go, they're not really troops, so it doesn't count. I mean, the spirit of it is still there.
Well, see, now that goes back to other discussions we've had, where when you look at the militarization of our police force, nationwide police force says,
right.
I mean, that line is so blurry.
Exactly.
I'm sorry.
We've effectively found a way around posse comitatus by just not calling them army, but making them de facto army.
And let me make the argument that it's one thing to meet force with force, but when you have an unarmed group, even if it is a mob, and you're going out in full battle rattle, that makes you a soldier.
Yep.
So, and yes. Riemann, to your comment, to a degree, yeah, the current military is just a mercenary organization. We have a volunteer army, mostly because we figured out across the years that it's a much more efficient way to do so when you have people there who want to be there. But yeah, they are all just there willing to wage war for a paycheck. The difference is that they have a contractual obligation and an oath to only wage war for these United States of America during their contracted service period. But where a true mercenary in the middle of a war would just say, well, this guy just offered me more, so screw you later. But I can definitely see how you could feel that way, and absolutely when you look at the fact of how political the upper echelons of the military are, yeah, it becomes part of the political machine as opposed to a peacekeeping and nation securing organization.
Right, which was the original idea behind military was to be defensive. If we were attacked, we'll call up the military. That's where the Second Amendment came from.
Right.
The idea that everybody needed to be armed. Anybody needed to be ready because we need to be a defensive force. And what we've seen is that we've become a very offensive force.
Absolutely.
And now, to an even higher degree, we're using it on our own citizens.
Right. Which I could definitely see that where, once again, just as an additional way to skirt the law, oh no, we did not use the United States military. These were independent contractors.
Yeah, and that's what I say. I mean, okay, so it's the same. It's what we did in Afghanistan and Iraq. We can't. Our military has to abide by International Geneva Convention.
Right.
Our military has to abide even by conventions that we didn't actually sign to, like the Treaty of Paris, but we agreed to stick with. So what does the U.S. do? We'll go hire some mercenaries.
Right.
Mercenaries are not actually part of the military. Therefore, they're not actually bound by it, and you get a whole bunch of crimes
Right.
committed.
Right.
But it wasn't our military, so we're okay. We didn't violate any treaties.
And I'd like to also say that we also see extreme acts of heroism from men and women in these contractor groups. I'm thinking of the men who defended the embassy in Benghazi, or the consulate, and a few of which who gave their lives.
Right, and there are definitely some good people there, but the overall use of them in general is tied to this idea that we can just have deniability. Just like right now, what they did with DHS. Oh, that wasn't DHS agents; those were contractors. Right. Okay, that's actually even worse because these guys are not even federal law enforcement officers.
Right.
To food for you's point, elections they happen every 2 years.
Right.
Blair and I were talking about this earlier. As all this stuff's going on, Congress right now could stop the president at any moment, but they don't. All they do is grandstand about it, and then they go back to arguing about other things that don't actually matter. They can stop him at any point, but they don't. They allow him to continue. The power of the executive office has grown year over year because Congress has allowed it to, or just explicitly given it to it. The only way it's going to change at this point is if people actually voted. I've said it before. I think I've said it right here before. Congress has something like a 10 to 15% approval rating, but a 90% re-election rating.
Of course, the next question is, how often does that come down to the evil we know kind of situation, or how often does it come down to, I don't like the guy that's the incumbent, but I agree with what his official stance is, at least, versus the opponent I absolutely disagree with across the board. We've really gotten ourselves into a situation where your choices are always a douchebag or a crap sandwich.
Right. Right. And part of that is, I think if we were better at getting the right candidates to the election itself. What happens a lot of times in the primaries, hardly anybody, we talk about how few people actually vote in the general election. Far fewer vote in the primaries. So in the primaries is where it really starts. I should say it's not even the primaries, before the primaries where it really starts. But because so few people care, it's not difficult for the corporations and the lobbyists to get who they want into the primary spot. If you were able to kind of win that battle before you even got to the primaries, you stand a chance. You also have to be willing to take a chance. What happens a lot of times is the incumbent wins the primary because, this other guy might not be able to win against the other party.
Right.
You got to take a chance. You're not getting anywhere with the guy you have. So be willing to take risks. You find a candidate that you really support, work on it, try to help them out, actually go out and vote, do all these different things to help boost their chances. But I mean, just what we do right now is the vast majority of the country just sits on their butts on voting day and on primary day and everything leading up to it, and then the day afterwards complain.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, we can either stop complaining about it or we can actually do something about it.
Right. Yeah, I've always felt for the people who are like, well, my vote doesn't count, so I'm not going to bother. You just gave up any right to complain. I mean, I guess
Right.
you didn't. It's one of the perks of living in a free country. Still one of the freest. That's easy enough to say. But yeah, I feel like you give up any legitimate claim. So,
Yeah.
but back to kind of the discussion at hand right now, talking about the snatch and grabs happening in Portland and Seattle and
Right.
those areas. I've also seen just so much social media, so toxic. If it weren't for you guys, I'd probably not be on social media at all right now. I'd like you guys to know that I'm trading my mental health for you guys. But
What's left of it?
yeah, I don't have a lot. I'm a little unstable. But one of the things, I've seen where I guess I'm gonna say the Black Lives Matter folks, the protesters. I don't exactly know what to say here because I'm not sure who is truly represented in the group, but seeing those of us who would call ourselves patriots called out because here's the exact thing you say that you're against, but you're for it because it's your president who's doing it. Now is the time to, everything I'd want to say here are trigger words and might get the live stream taken off air. For the big ice house party. There we go. I think I can say it that way.
I like igloos.
Yeah, I like igloos. They're pretty decent coolers. They're a little overpriced. So, anyway, all that to say, I have seen patriots being called out for, just being blowhards, I guess is a good way to say it. I have seen people saying, well, why would we go to war for them when there's no way they would stand with us, etc., etc. And I think there's good points kind of on both sides to a degree, as is ironically usually the case if you're going to approach things level-headedly. So one point that Elias made earlier, we were talking about this earlier, as you guys can imagine, we communicate before we go on a show so we have an idea of what we want to talk about.
Sometimes.
A little bit. Except last week when it was like 20 till and I'm like, hey, you gonna join? But anyway, I think that there's a lot to they wouldn't stand with us, so we're stabbing ourselves in the back to stand with them. To the point that legitimately, and again, we've now got to separate rioters from protesters. And even more than that, we have to separate terrorists from rioters. Because I think that there are protesters who are so frustrated, so angry, that it boils over into violent outbursts. And I'm not saying that that's an acceptable thing.
What
Yeah,
is the reality?
and somehow, Elias, OBS is not being very happy right now.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, this is a good time.
I mean,
Excuse me.
are you sure it's OBS?
No, I'm pretty positive it's OBS. All right, so we're going to keep talking. I'm going to try to fix this. The black screen on your screen is Elias. Anyway, so we have people who are very frustrated and not entirely sure how to express that, I think. And so as such, they're doing things that absolutely are illegal, are potentially harmful to others, are absolutely unacceptable. But much like I have to be very honest. There's been more than once that I have gotten mad and, thrown a tool or something in frustration. That
Right.
doesn't make it okay. Absolutely not. But it's you can understand where that would come from. But then you have, so that's the rioters. But then you have the ones who their only goal in all of this is to cause destruction. Their goal going into this is violence. And that's terrorism. Plain and simple, that is terrorism. And that's all there is to it. And those people, boy, that's dangerous, those people. Individuals like that, obviously, they are a danger to others, and as such, need to be apprehended. There are legal recourses for all this, and it's there for a reason. And there's Elias back just as soon as it goes up to you guys. But that doesn't mean that the right answer is to create a Gestapo.
Now, I want to step back just for a second, what you're talking about, the people that are calling out and with the Black Lives Matter. I'm not a big fan of I don't want to call them an organization because there's no official organization. Anybody can call themselves part of it. Movement, if you will. Because if you actually look at the movement's goals and everything, they're not really the greatest. But when we deal with the protests in general, in the past, when we've had these issues with police, there's always been at least some reasonable doubt when you watch the different video. There's been a couple of them where there wasn't. For instance, Castillo, I think was his name, in Minnesota. Ironically enough, that one in Minnesota also, who was legally carrying a firearm. But for many of these, there's been at least a little bit of, I can kind of see the officer side of it, and it's really hard to tell. What we saw, though, happen in Minnesota back in May, that's a clear-cut thing. And that's one of those things where there should have been more people out there. It should not have been just the reason Black Lives Matter was able to just take it over so quickly was because none of the patriots, or whatever they want to call themselves, none of them stepped out to also protest. Instead of looking at it as, hey, this isn't acceptable. It doesn't matter who's under the cops' knee. It's not acceptable. What happened is none of them showed up. So it immediately became about race. Where what it could have been in the very beginning was a unified front against police brutality, against this overreaching of police, which is what we were sitting at, if I remember correctly. We were talking about the fact that they needed to fire him. He needed to go to jail. They needed, be tried for murder, and the police department needs to needs to pay for this, not just monetarily.
Right.
The police need to pay for this issue. But what happened is, in general, is what you were seeing is a sea of
Right.
black faces,
This needed.
and that's a problem. It became race because none of our side stepped up
Right.
and said, "Hey,
This
this
needed
isn't
to
right."
get looped in with a mass protest about Duncan Lemp and Breonna Taylor.
Right.
And Breonna Taylor has obviously been brought into this now, but it needed to be, I think, more than what it is, and to a degree, some of what it is. And so, food for you. Yes, all lives matter. But through the course of this, I also understand when somebody who has felt the effects of systemic racism their whole life, when that's what they've lived with, I can see, I have come to the point where I can empathize with how offensive that statement would be to them. I can definitely see where the example, at the Boston Marathon attack here a few years back, and though everything was Boston strong, and somebody could have said, "Oh, all cities are strong or should be strong in the situation," and I can see where
Right.
Or if God forbid any of us were to lose a child to a disease or to an accident, if somebody were to be at the funeral and be like, "Whoa, but this many kids die from this every day,"
Right.
I can understand, I can empathize with how that would be offensive to somebody who, and so I've really,
Right.
I have seen some personal growth, I feel like, through the course of this. Now there's a lot of people that would tell you that it's not enough, and then guess what? I'm never going to be enough, and we can go into a whole philosophical and religious diatribe on that. But so I understand what you're saying, yes, which is why I say that this should have been lumped in, even with folks like Duncan Lemp, who, if you aren't familiar with that story, he wasn't black. And so I understand where you're coming from, and hopefully maybe if maybe that explains to somebody else why that statement would be offensive.
When you perceive it as an attack on your community or attack on this
Right.
particular subset,
Right.
that's why it's going there. It's not because they're saying nobody else matters. It's for them it is. And when I say it, I'm really kind of using it, especially with the people who really mean it. They're not using it as a
Right.
pretense for destruction and stuff like that, and kind of thing. I'm talking about the ones who actually are looking at it going, this is our community. I completely understand why they kind of have that mindset. And I with you. I understand why for them it's offensive. It's because they're not saying others don't. They're saying, look, this is happening to us in our neighborhoods.
So,
But yeah, you're right. If you brought in those other people, we could have kept it actually focused on the main thing, which was no matter who's under that knee, no matter who is getting shot by that cop,
Right.
it's not acceptable. And instead, what happened was a lot of our community just went, well, I mean, we'll protest that we can't, go to somebody else's house in Michigan, but this, we can't
Right.
be
Well,
bothered
and
for this.
honestly, I mean, it's really just everything coming to a head across this year, because it was, we just had Greg Anderson not that long ago, who we talked about, and unfortunately we weren't able to get a hold of him and have him on the show or anything. But he ended up losing his job because as a police officer, he was talking about, as cops, don't enforce unconstitutional bullcrap. And then got called to the carpet for it, said he wasn't going to take it down, said he stood by it, and lost his employment. So, yeah, there has been some version of this coming for a long time. So
the problem, Brastard, is that the protest devolved into that because nobody from, if you want to call this left right, nobody from the right showed up. And so it immediately got, co-opted by rioters and the negative side of Black Lives Matter
And
and those kind of various
Antifa and
groups, because we didn't show up to it. If our side had shown up to it, then the focus would have been forced to. They could not have called it a white versus black thing because they could not have called it a right versus left thing because everybody would have been there. But instead, because our side didn't show up, it immediately became part of it immediately was just kind of taken over by the left, and Antifa got in there, and the negative aspects of Black Lives Matter got in there, and all those groups got in there because we decided it wasn't worth our time. Because for some reason we couldn't see that aspect of, this is not a black versus white, this is a government versus the people.
Yeah, to speak to that, I think that's a really good way to put it. I'm on the side of being able to protest. Whether it's our rallies that we saw back in January in Richmond, or the rallies in Michigan, or protesting what a community perceives to be a racial issue. I am for protest even when I disagree with the content of the protest. I am 100% against the riot and terrorism. So I hope that comes across, and I hope that makes sense. So to that point, I am not in favor of these protests. I'm not in favor of the concept of, let the community, let's replace all the police with social workers, and because I don't think that will work. The violent among the community that already prey on, I'm going to use the innocent, and I'm going to use it very loosely. They absolutely would take advantage of that. So it's just, and it's such a complex thing. Things like we hear when I hear defund the police and disband the police. All right, I immediately think of every man for themselves, and one side thinks it's going to be utopia, and a realist is going to say, no, the wolves will prey on the sheep. But then I heard it presented this week as, no, if we take away the money that's going to the military equipment and put that towards mental health and things, and I'm like, there's a point there. Now, I'm not saying I think that'll work, but we've been talking for 6 months now about demilitarizing the police.
And this was all before all this happened. You and I were talking about
again,
this.
Going back to that realism, I'm afraid that if funding is taken from the police department, it won't then be taken from the procurement of military hardware. It will be taken from the parts that actually need shored up. And that's on a community to do something better with how their police department is. And I apologize about the echo, guys. I'm not sure if maybe my microphone's not picking up Elias. I've had some problems with that with a headset in the past. I'm legitimately not sure what's causing it because neither he nor I are hearing an echo here. So anyway, and yeah, rioting, absolutely. Rioting's another situation entirely. Duke, welcome. And food for you. Yeah, this might be the only time I've ever been accused of being too polite. I don't always succeed well, but I try to be a reasoned individual. I will visit excessive violence in protection of my own. But I don't want to just always go around hulked out and angry. I've done that before, and it's really bad for the blood pressure.
Yeah.
So, um,
But anyway, I mean, yeah,
and
like I said, I think we can come down to the thing of, we're not talking about the riots. Everybody's against the riots.
right,
Everybody's against. But again, it's that thing of it was allowed to get out of control. And, not to mention the fact of we've heard for the last couple of years of politics trying to divide, purposely trying to divide
yeah,
people. And,
absolutely,
and again, that's where this thing got easily co-opted was because we didn't show up and we didn't decide to take a stand police. And in fact, made it even worse by siding with the police. In a lot of cases, these so-called patriots were actually siding with the police.
right,
Right after saying the government's not going to tell me what to do or take my stuff, at the same time are applauding the agents of the government in all
right,
reality. And I'm not saying, not talking about all cops being bad. I'm talking about an overall
right,
idea, especially among the higher brass within police departments and the government's use of them is what I'm addressing. We were actually defending our so-called patriots, the ones who want to go around wearing, shirts about snow houses, are over here then turning around and going, siding with the police, siding with Trump, siding with federal authorities, throwing bags over people's heads and throwing them in SUVs. If anybody here thinks that the Republicans care about them any more than the Democrats, you're fooling yourself. If you think they care more about your personal freedoms than the Democrats, you're fooling yourself at that point. And
yeah,
because the fact is, neither of them really care about you. They'll take you for what you have. But if we had done, it gave them that entrance. Like I said, they were able to co-opt and immediately be able to start dividing
right,
even more and saying, see, they're not even on your side.
right.
They care more about, being able to go camping than whether or not, police are abusing power.
Right. There's just so much hypocrisy. It's kind of the trademark of humanity. Do as I say, not as I do. Good for me, but not for thee, etc., etc. Because I saw Brastard. If one of us disobeys the NFA and gets caught, no one will come help us. Absolutely. You might have a local group of very like-minded patriots, and then the next thing you know, you have a Waco situation or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. It could be either side. There's a couple different points of that. Excuse me. A couple different points of that. One is, yeah, you could have your like-minded people that you've met every single day. And you're thinking, we're going to our protest together and we're doing our thing together and all that stuff. Let's say Virginia. But I guarantee you that the vast majority of them, the day that the ATF shows up on their doorstep because they've decided that something they have is now illegal, none of those other guys that were standing next to you protest. So if that's your basis for who am I going to protest with against the government or against wrongful actions, then you've got to kind of rethink it because chances are you're going to be by yourself no matter what. But here's the flip side. Why would you expect them to come and help you if you're not also willing to go and help them?
Right. It's such
it's a two-way street. And the only way it's going to ever start, somebody has to be the first one to take this. Somebody has to be the one to take that first step.
Right.
So it's kind of hard. Like that's where I'm thinking is on the one hand, yeah, those guys who will protest, they're probably not going to be with you anyway that day that happens. But on the other side, on the other aspect of it is you're not willing to go stand with these guys over here, so why would you expect them to come stand with you?
So a couple of other points that have come to mind. One, Elias pointed out that there were actually veterans who went and held a line in between overreaching authority and actually peaceful protesters, and I feel like that's, again, because you have that freedom to assemble, you have that right to express yourself. So I'd like to acknowledge that, A, and B, I just I mentioned to Elias earlier, I really find it ironic. I was going to say funny. That's not right. Because just like the protesters are saying, well, you guys wanted this big ice house party, and now here's the perfect opportunity because us being apprehended like this is illegal and you're not doing anything. The flip side to that is that they were just how long ago absolutely delighted in the concept of the same kind of police action being taken against law-abiding gun owners to forcibly disarm us. So Brastard, I think you said both sides are my enemy.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably a really good way to describe most of us is we just want to be left alone.
Yeah. And to point out, I mean, that's a really good aspect of it where you're talking about, when the vets came armed and held the line, we didn't really see any action from the federal troops because the guys were thugs.
Right.
When it was protesters that were unarmed, except for, makeshift things that really aren't a huge threat in all reality, they had no problem shooting into crowds, grabbing people, hauling them off.
Right.
But as soon as there was somebody that they knew was willing to do something, they stopped.
Yeah.
And that's the whole aspect of the Second Amendment and why it was what it was intended for. It wasn't intended so that we would go out and have all-out war. It was intended as a reminder to the government that the people are armed.
Right.
And and it's that kind of thing of the same thing of one of the arguments that pro Second Amendment always have against those who would have guns completely banned in the country is that when you've got a bad guy who is scoping out houses, he's not going to go hit the house where he knows that those people carry guns and they have this stuff. He's going to go hit the house that he knows are anti-gun because he knows there's not going to be anything there to stop him.
Right.
It's that same kind of concept.
Yeah.
So a lot of these guys are just plain thugs. They were sent out there to bully around a bunch of people, whether you agree with the protesters or not. And that's one of those key things. Whether you agree with them or not does not matter. The First Amendment, the Bill of Rights is there for everybody. Not who you agree with, not who you disagree with. It's there for everybody. Because if it's not there for everybody, then it's not there for anybody.
Right. But at the same time, terrorism is terrorism.
Right. Protest. That's all I'm talking. Yeah.
So this whole, they tried it peacefully and nothing happened. Well, then you keep trying it peacefully.
Right. And we have recourses. We have courts. We have other things. It's not just we have to escalate from here to here. We have due process in this country, and we have a legal process. And that legal process wasn't followed. It was just, I'm going to jump from here to here because I'm the president and I can do what I want. And that right there should scare everybody.
Right. And so moving then away from the protest, which is executive actions that have happened and have already been signed and, et cetera, et cetera, looking forward.
Continuing on with I'm the president and I can do whatever I want.
Right. So now President Trump says that he's going to ban the social media app TikTok through executive action. Now, once again, I know a lot of people who really annoy me because they will just spontaneously bust out into TikTok dances. I work with youth group and things like that, and it's incredibly annoying.
Yeah, for the record, I had to go look up what TikTok was.
So
I still didn't fully understand it.
And would I be surprised at all if a social media app owned by a Chinese company is wantonly harvesting user data? No, I would not. Why not? Because the ones that are United States social media apps wantonly harvest user data. It's not. I think that's one of my big problems. Is it's not about the privacy of American citizens. It's about the fact that privacy is not being undone by a United States company where the government can just say, hey, give me that data. Once again, it doesn't regardless whether or not you think that TikTok is great or terrible, the problem is that we have one more instance where President Trump is saying, this is how we're going to do it. One more instance where he is acting like he is an all-powerful monarch and completely bypassing the legislative process. And then to take it one step further, because he said that something will be done by September 15th, or he will ban the app. And then Microsoft is in works to purchase at least the US arm of TikTok. And President Trump, I cannot find the article, so maybe I can find it back here where I quoted it to Elias earlier. Here we go. Trump on Monday appeared to suggest Microsoft would have to pay the U.S. government in order to complete the deal, and compared the relationship of the app in the U.S. to that of a landlord and tenant, saying without a lease the tenant has nothing. A very substantial portion of that price is going to have to come to the Treasury of the United States, because we're making it possible for the deal to happen. Right now, they don't have any rights unless we give it to them. So if we're going to give them the rights, it has to come into this country. What part of private business is that?
So, like I said, to me, that sounded more like he's trying to be a businessman and trying to get a little bit of a finder's fee.
Yeah,
I know that there are some. So there's a committee called CFIUS, which is the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, and it's made up of a bunch of different agencies, and pretty much they kind of monitor and regulate any foreign transactions and things like that, business transactions. Trump can't outright ban TikTok necessarily, but there are actions he could do. CFS has been investigating them in general for intelligence reasons, and now they were to find, for instance, that they were leaking things to the Chinese government. He might have a little bit of wiggle room there to do it, but it's still not that simple, because we're talking about a program, not really a company. The company's not really doing any business in the U.S. They write a program and put it into the App Store and do whatever. Right. So it's not really quite so cut and dry. There are some avenues, but it's not really so much as I sign this paper and it's done. Now, from what I understand, there are some times where, because if they have to get involved with a transaction, like with a U.S. company buying something from an overseas, there can be fees, but that's not really what he's talking about, which just makes it more interesting of what he's talking about. Right. So.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. Obviously, Elias and I aren't going to solve the world's problems on this live stream. Odds are nobody in our government will ever even hear about this. Or you guys will hear a crash in the background and see me get snagged right off camera. I don't know.
But that's just the latest thing of executive orders.
Right.
He's talking about payroll taxes. He's talking about extending unemployment stuff without legislation. And, it's just another long line. And at this point, I can't tell how much of it is him just spouting off because he wants somebody to do something. And so he's threatening it. Or if we look at the last several decades, actually by now, of executive orders, if he's looking at it going, I can probably get away with this. And the sad reality is he probably could.
Right.
Because Congress is inept.
So to put some numbers to this, by the way, in his first term to date, President Trump has signed 175 executive orders. Now, I do want to go on record. Here, I will, let me just drop this nifty link that Elias gave me, because my Google foo was failing. You can go through and you can click around and see every one of those. Some of those are just like re-ups of existing executive orders. We're not separating any of that out. He has put his John Hancock on 175 executive orders to date. President Obama, in his 2 terms, signed 276. President Bush, W. Bush, signed 291. President Clinton, 254, and that's the earliest it goes.
When you can see in his first year, he did 55.
Right.
Which is about on par with W.
Yeah.
W did 54 in 1 year.
So,
executive orders were meant to, Congress writes a law. President signs the law. Congress writes the bill. The president signs it. It becomes a law. Executive orders were supposed to be, how are we now going to enforce the law? What do my departments that are under the executive branch need to do in order to enforce this law or put this law into place? Instead, what they become is legislating by EO.
mm-hmm.
And again, this goes back to Congress has allowed it. Congress could at any moment stop this, but Congress has allowed it. In fact, Congress has actually given more power to the president to continue this on and on. Like under emergency powers, the president can pretty much, there's a lot of things the president can do,
Right,
without any input from Congress whatsoever. And it's because Congress gave it to him. It's kind of like how Congress was trying to backtrack when they were afraid he was going to try to go to war with Iran. And they tried to change the law so that he couldn't do it. Well, guess what? The president couldn't do it originally, but Congress gave him the authority.
Yep.
So, it's like Congress sitting here complaining about the president signing executive orders is because, well, y'all gave it to him and you keep doing it.
Right.
And when he does it, nobody sits there and says, hey, maybe we ought to stop this from happening.
Yeah. And the flip side is the current Congress wants to blame all of the country's problems on our current POTUS, and yet many of them have been in Congress since what, the 60s?
Yep.
And this just goes to show why we need term limits across the board.
Constitutional Convention, come on, states. You have the authority. In fact, that was the preferred method by the framers. The framers didn't want Congress initiating because they knew it was going to be difficult to get them to do anything. So if you got the states to agree, you cut Congress right out of it.
Right.
But nobody's got the guts to actually do it.
And if we were doing things by Constitutional Convention, all of these flyover states would have just as much power as, because everybody gets, 2 votes? I mean, I don't remember exactly how it works.
It's 3/5 of the state, yeah.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with the Constitutional Convention and passing of amendments, every state's equal. It doesn't matter if you have, 10 million people or you got 1 million.
Yeah. Zafiel just said there are free Robert A. Sadowski books on Amazon in ebook format for anybody interested. And I recently started reading De-Infringed. That has been... I can only read a little bit at a time because I really start getting angry, and it's kind of funny because it specifically is talking about the Second Amendment, and yet I see how it applies to all of our current situations with the pandemic and with the riots and with it just kind of opens our eyes to how everything is going. And speaking of how everything is going, we have touched on the executive orders that I was wanting to. Definitely, I feel like it's highlighted kind of this slippery slope that we are on. But we have been on air for an hour and 15 minutes, and I think that's kind of a good time to start tapering things down. Shooter's Bible Guide to Combat Handguns. Well, yeah, I'm just going to have to go through and get a whole bunch of new ebooks, though. Thanks for pointing that out, Zafiel. Guys, if you haven't yet, I obviously would appreciate a thumbs up if you are enjoying the stream or the concepts presented. Of course, if you dislike it, that's what that thumbs down button is for. It'll hurt my feelings just a little, but that's okay. The interaction still helps with the algorithm. If you really want to screw a creator over, don't do anything. Appreciate you guys joining us. Once again, if you haven't subbed to the channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. If you want to know when I'm uploading new content, you're going to want to ring that bell as well. Once again, when we hit 500 subscribers, we're going to do our next round of giveaways. And we're on the way to that magical 1,000 subscriber mark. You guys are amazing. It took me right at a year to get to the 250 subscriber mark, and now we're looking at doubling that in less than 6 months. So you guys are amazing. You've been an amazing community, and I just anticipate that you guys will continue to be that way, because the core of the 2A community really is a great community. Yeah, we see otherwise, but yeah, by and large. If you would like to get some 2A gear and help support the channel financially, you can do that by heading over to the merchandise store, picking yourself up a snazzy t-shirt. I can't really get up to where you can see it. It's up on screen. I'm currently wearing the Tactical Review logo shirt. Poor Conservative drew this logo up for me, and I really appreciate that. The channel does get a few dollars from every purchase on the Teespring store. If you would like to directly support the channel, you can do that over on patreon.com. That's patreon.com/tacticalreview. Or if you don't like Patreon, we're also on Subscribestar. And obviously, that money just comes directly to the channel. I do attempt to always get my Patreon supporters early access to the uploaded videos, unless there obviously happens to be something time sensitive. As a matter of fact, Patreon subscribers, I think you guys have access to next week's video already as we speak. If you're not following the channel on social media, I think that's a thing you should be doing. That's kind of where the fun discussion happens. You'll see...
Be careful if you're on TikTok.
Right, well, I'm not on TikTok. I'm not on TikTok, so you can't do that. I am on Facebook and Instagram. Most of the time it's pictures of, you know, ammo I get in, accessories that we're going to be testing, so on and so forth. Sometimes it's just workout stuff, and you know, sometimes it's just reposts from the other channels that I follow. Trying to find the things that I need to put back up here. Of course, you see on the screen, Elias does run the Liberty Review podcast. You can follow him wherever you prefer to digest your podcasts, including on his YouTube channel. So he's got a few episodes up, and Zephiel emailed me the link. Sorry, guys. I will get that. I saw a squirrel, guys. I saw a squirrel. Anyway, so Elias does, of course, have other things that he does, including helping me with these live streams. He brings the good stuff. So he gets podcasts up as he is able, and I have thoroughly enjoyed every one of them. Does a great job of just trying to present the facts as the law says the facts are, and if he's going to argue one side, he will typically even play devil's advocate for the other. Anything to add to that, Elias? I'm sitting here talking, and it's your podcast.
You're fine. No, it's been a little bit as I was trying to figure out the format of what I wanted to do with it, and I think I finally figured it out. And you know, as Blair said, it's going to be more. You know, you've got plenty of shows that have opinions out there. Yeah, everybody's an expert. Everybody has an opinion, and they all stink. What I want to do with that is more of, let's not get opinionated. Let's not get into the partisan part of the politics, because as we stated earlier, both sides kind of want to screw you. So the idea behind it is it's going to present the facts. Here's what's going on, and here is how it relates to the actual law. And, you know, I look at the supreme law of the land, the Constitution. And whether I agree with something or I don't agree with something, I definitely look at, is it legal? You know, we had the discussion a while back about the masks, for instance, in Indiana, or I'm sorry, not the mask, but ordering businesses have to be shut down and things like that. And I said, well, whether I like it or not, it is legal because the governor has the right to regulate business. So it's things like that where even if I don't agree with it and my listeners don't agree with it, it's more of, this isn't about whether we agree with something. This is it legal? Is what they are doing actually within the bounds of the Constitution? Or have they gone rogue and we need to go fire them?
Right, and there's a lot of things even things that we celebrate through history, because morally they accomplished a good end that Elias and I have discussed, and really weren't constitutional and probably shouldn't have been allowed.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I think that falls under, though, that the victors write the history books. So there's that.
And thank you for posting the link up there for him.
Absolutely, absolutely, guys. I posted the link to Elias' YouTube channel, and then directly to his website. And the website, I think he only started uploading to, or mirroring it to YouTube with the last episode. So the first couple episodes you'll need to pick up either at his website or Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all of the many others that I won't even begin to remember. So thank you guys.
There will be another one coming here very soon, because I do want to get another one out.
Yeah, it's those of you guys who are also content creators, you guys just understand that it's a labor of love, and sometimes it's just one iron in the fire too many. So we appreciate you guys sticking with us. I think I can speak for all content creators. We thank you for sticking with us through thick and thin, even when things aren't coming as quickly as maybe you'd like.
And I have been told that my link for some reason doesn't work, so I will fix that.
Okie doke. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Again, I look forward to seeing you guys in the live chat with next week's video premiere. Look forward to seeing you again next week, hopefully at the same time and place, technology willing, and Lord willing, and the creek don't rise.
Okay, just say real quick, that one works. Apparently, I forgot to do www redirect, so that one.
Yeah, okay. I've done that before.
All right, I'll have to fix that.
What about SoundCloud, Elias?
I don't know what SoundCloud is, but I will find out.
It's basically like where people can just upload their mixtapes. It's free audio hosting.
I'm not writing you a mixtape, Brownies.
Our English challenged Finnish friend, I seem to recall that he had a SoundCloud for his EDM mixes. So,
tell you what, Brownies, just for you, I'll find it. I'll figure out how to do it.
Nice. All right. Well, guys.
That way I can get my 6 fan.
All right. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, shoot straight and stay safe.